going to talk about overtraining today. And I know it's a concept that people usually think just applies to elite athletes who are training 6 to 8 hours a day at their sport of choice, but it can also affect you if you are a recreational athlete with a lot of life stressors. Luckily, there's a couple tips and tricks that you can keep in mind to keep that overtraining in check and apply what I call the Goldilocks stimulus, so the just right amount of training workouts to help you make progress without kind of risking your health. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. We're releasing new videos every week on the theory behind training for outdoor adventures of all kinds, as well as we're starting to release some workouts that you can do and fit into your larger plan to work on those skills as well. And if you know me, you know that I love using heart rate as an indicator for training. We're also going to be using it as an indicator for overtraining here today as well. So if you have a heart rate monitor, that's awesome. If you want to know more about heart rate training, I've got some videos I will link in the cards that can get you on that track as well. So let's get clear on what overtraining is before we move forward. I've heard athletes call it burnout before, but what it is basically is despite a large training load and maybe an increase in training load, your performance is decreasing and you don't know why. It can also mean that you dread your workouts, you feel tired and exhausted all of the time, and you're not finding that joy in training anymore. The long and short of it is that your body can't recover from the training that you're giving it, even if you haven't changed how much training you're doing. But before we go into it in more detail, let's recap the supercompensation curve, my favorite curve, so we're on the same page when we start talking about how we can avoid this situation. So let me grab a Sharpie. Okay, pink. So let's talk about the supercompensation curve. We are going to put your fitness on this line, and we're going to put time over here. Fitness over time. So we all know that the goal of doing workouts or the goal of training is to get fitter. Now, fitter for you might be a faster 5K time. It might be, the simple example I usually use is how much we can do a biceps curl with for 1 rep. Whatever that is, you're gonna start at a certain spot. So let's say you start right here on this curve. So you are this fit. Let's say you run your 5K in 20 minutes flat, or you can biceps curl 45 pounds. What you're gonna do is apply a training stimulus, right? That's what we do in the gym or on the trails. We're gonna do a workout of some sort. So that's right here. Immediately after that workout, so let's say you run that 5K as hard as you can. If someone asked you to run that 5K again, you wouldn't be able to run it as quick, right? You would be, by definition, less fit than when you started. Same with the biceps curls. If you're doing a max lift, you're not going to be, at the end of that workout, you're going to have muscle fatigue and damage. That's going to mean you can't lift as much. So technically, your fitness is now going to be down here. And if you just looked at it until then, you'd say, well, working out is stupid. It means that we're less fit than we were when we started. But then the magic comes in, and your body decides that it needs to repair those muscles and refuel those cells. And what's gonna happen is you're gonna end up, after your body's recovered, fitter than you were before. Now ideally, this is when we give you another training stimulus, and again, your body's gonna be beat down from that, but maybe it won't go down as low as it was before, and you are going to recover, and you're gonna be fitter than you were before. So this is how your supercompensation curve works. And if done correctly, you will see a real measurable change in your body after a training cycle is done. Now, where overtraining happens is if when I'm not quite recovered yet, I apply another training stimulus, which then makes me go down again instead of up. I then apply another training stimulus, I go down instead of up. And this curve eventually makes me, if we bring it on over here to our fitness line, I am way less fit than I was before. That is overtraining. In a lab setting, what they're doing is giving people these impossibly hard workouts day after day after day in order to get them into this situation. And all the data and research that we have on overtraining comes from that type of environment. There is a bit of a catch though. It's not just training stimuluses that can make us not recover adequately from our workouts. Stress in your life, and this could be a positive or a negative stressor, can also cause this same curve to happen because we're getting stress that's not allowing our body to recover. Additionally, not fueling yourself properly, so you're not giving your body the building blocks that you need to bump up, to level up, so to speak, that will also lead to this downward spiral, if you will, instead of that beautiful supercompensation curve that we love so much. So, now that we understand that, let's talk about how we can catch this before it happens, because it might sound like it's a little bit inevitable. And the problem is, once we get into that overtrained state, it's going to take an exponential amount of rest and recovery before we can come back up to anywhere near the fitness level we had before. So you get into a hole that's really tough to dig yourself out of. So how can we go from that to recovering properly and making sure we don't get into this overtrained state? There are some early warning signs that don't include your heart rate, so you always want to be looking out for these. And those things are going to be things like decreased performance, so you just can't seem to hit those pace markers that you were before, or you can't seem to lift as much as you were before. Agitation or moodiness, and this can be kind of hard for you to see, but sometimes the other people in your life can tell you if that's happening. Extreme fatigue, so every workout, even the recovery ones, feel so hard and you're just struggling to get through them. It can also lead to chronic or nagging injuries because we're not being able to recover and put those building blocks back on. You can have an injury that's nagging. Insomnia or really restless sleeping, so you can't seem to get a good night's sleep, which is a tough one because that can cause the overtrained state, but it also is a symptom of the overtrained state. So it can get you into a bit of a vicious cycle. And then finally, the last one, and the one that I'm going to spend the most time on today, is going to be heart rate. And this is really neat because your heart rate can give you insights before some of these other issues start happening. So if you know me, you know that I love using heart rate. It is a great way to get a glimpse into what is actually happening within your body. And I actually have a neat story that I'll share with you at the end of this video about how heart rate gave me an early warning sign of a pretty gross sickness that I had. And I wouldn't have known, and I probably would have had that sickness on the middle of a hill in Chile if I hadn't seen this early warning sign for my heart rate. So stay tuned for that. But first, let's talk about what heart rate parameters or indicators can tell us that we might be overtrained. Our heart, to start with, our heart has this exceptionally hard, pretty thankless job, right? It is delivering over 2,000 gallons of blood a day to all our cells. Well, the equivalent of that, with like 86,000 at least heartbeats in a given day. So your heart is always working to deliver those nutrients to your cells and clear your waste, which is super cool. Our heart also is responding really quickly to our surrounding environment to make sure that we have the nutrients that we need. So for instance, when you go from lying to standing, your heart is going to have a little spike in your heart rate, and then it's going to come down as it helps you make sure you don't lose blood pressure in your brain and pass out. Your heart is also going to be adjusting in everyday life. Your heart rate increases when you think about something slightly stressful. It decreases when you think about something that is restful or relaxing to you. So your heart is working very hard all the time. If you start to be overtrained, your heart loses its ability to adjust to the environment immediately. The way that a lot of elite athletes get a glimpse into this is by using something called HRV, or heart rate variability. So even if your heart is beating 60 times a minute, there's actually variations, if we look really precisely at when your heart's beating, in between how long and short those distances are in between heart rate. The drawback for us as recreational athletes, or people without access to these incredibly expensive devices that can measure precisely enough, is that we can't get data that's good enough to actually use HRV to tell us if we're overtraining. So we have to use some other measurements instead. Luckily, they are very helpful anyways, and they give us the same data that we would get if we were using HRV, which is super cool. So when your heart is overstressed, because you're in an overtrained state, you might find that your resting heart rate is elevated at all intensities. So me sitting here, instead of having an active resting heart rate of 70 beats per minute, I might be sitting at 100 all the time. And when I start to run, my heart rate might spike to 140, even if I'm just at a jog, instead of going up to like the 120, 125 that it normally does. If we get very, very overtrained, our heart rate response is going to be dampened at all intensities. So your resting heart rate would plummet all of a sudden to be in the 40s or 50s, even if before it was at 65. And then when you try and run, no matter how hard you try, your heart rate won't go up. So that your heart rate is going to be decreased at all intensities if you are severely overtrained. And if you are just a little overtrained, it's going to be elevated at all intensities. Now, it would be pretty difficult to compare, oh, was I running as hard as I was yesterday and now my heart rate's higher and I don't know if that means I'm overtrained. So the best thing to do is to use a predictable and repeatable and reliable time of day to measure your heart rate over time, so you know what it normally is and you can compare that to how you feel when you might be overtrained. So what I like to get people to do is take your resting heart rate first thing in the morning, every morning. Now, you guys know that I'm not a huge fan of optical heart rate monitors for a lot of reasons, but they are good at doing this baseline morning resting heart rate level. So if you simply have your watch on, if you have one, overnight, and in the morning you just start a little activity and you just measure your heart rate for 1 minute of lying still in bed in the morning. If you track that over time, it can, once you have enough reliable data, once you have like a month of data behind you, you'll be able to tell if your resting heart rate is severely increased and decreased. The caveat to that is with fitness training that's effective, your resting heart rate will likely decrease. So we're looking like over time. So over a year and a half, your resting heart rate is going to go down a little bit because your heart's becoming more efficient. So what you're looking for, if you're going to use morning resting heart rate as an indicator, is you're looking for a sharp decrease or elevation in your resting heart rate in the morning. When I was a ski racer, they had us do something called the RESCO protocol. So we would be lying down for 5 minutes at the beginning of the day, measuring our heart rate using a heart rate strap. Then we would stand up for 2 minutes and we would report 3 numbers each morning. We would report our lying resting heart rate. We'd report the peak, how high our heart rate went when we initially stood up. And then we would report our 2-minute standing average. And what these 3 numbers gave was even more depth into what our heart was doing. So our trainers could look at those numbers and decide if we needed to take a day off training or if we were doing well and we could push it that day. The funny story I have for you is I was training, we were on a training trip in Chile, of all places, and I woke up one morning. I was feeling a little tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. When we were down there training for skiing, we were at a high elevation always, and so a little bit of fatigue would be expected because you're at a higher altitude than you normally are. So I felt a little off, but it was okay. I started my testing my Resco protocol, lying down, my heart rate was elevated, which was kind of odd. After the 5 minutes, I stood up. My heart rate didn't really have a response at all, so it stayed low, and then it gently climbed and climbed and climbed, so that instead of it being resting heart rate down here, peak when I stand, and then normal standing heart rate, it was resting heart rate, no peak, and then a really high 2-minute average. And I thought that was weird, but I really didn't think it meant that I couldn't train that day. Like, I went there to train. I wanted to train. And so I reported these numbers, and they said, maybe you should stay back from training this morning. And I was a little frustrated by it, if I'm being honest, because I wanted to get out there. But I got back to my room. Shortly after, the food poisoning that I did not know that I had acquired hit me full force, and I was puking for 3 days, ended up in a hospital to get my fluids put back in, which was a unique experience for me at the time, because they're not speaking English to you, they're giving you an IV, you're puking all the time, you're very tired, so you don't really know what's going on. But I ended up recovering and being fine and being able to join everyone for our second training block down there, which was good. But I would have been puking on the side of a mountain in Chile if that Resco protocol had not been an early warning sign that something was amiss. So this stuff works, it's incredible, but you do need a couple things to start with. You need to accumulate that kind of baseline for you over time, typically, ideally, during a lighter training cycle, so that you know what your actual resting heart rate is. And then you need to pay attention if there's any sharp changes in what that heart is doing in response to exercise. So let's break this down into 3 practical tips that you can take with you onto the trails today. The first is measure your resting heart rate, even if it's just using an optical heart rate monitor in the morning, and keep a track of that so that you know where you normally sit and you're able to notice if things start changing rapidly. Second thing you want to do is pay attention to how you feel about training and how you feel pre and post training. So if it's okay to have an off workout or two, we all do, and it's training through some of those off workouts that give us a change in our body eventually. However, if you're starting to feel dreading training for multiple weeks at a time and nothing feels good for over a week's worth of workouts, there might be a sign that something's going a little amiss and you should take a closer look. Have a wilder day, and we will see you out there. If this was valuable, please hit that like button. That helps more people find our training and coaching services. And if you want to know about those services, check out the link in the description to our online training programs. We are located in stunning southern Alberta, but we can work with you no matter where you are.